My pregnant sister vanished the morning of her baby shower. I was not prepared for what I'd find when I went looking for her. I never imagined that the happiest day of my sister's pregnancy would become the most terrifying day of our lives. My older sister, Emma, had spent nearly 5 years trying to have a baby. She had gone through endless doctor's appointments, heartbreaking miscarriages, and more disappointment than anyone should ever have to endure. When she finally reached the 3rd trimester with a healthy baby girl, our entire family celebrated as though we had all won the lottery. Her baby shower was supposed to be the moment when everything finally felt normal. Friends and relatives had traveled from several states away. My parents rented a beautiful event space. My aunt baked a 3-tier cake covered with tiny pink flowers, and I had spent weeks putting together handmade decorations because Emma loved personal touches more than expensive gifts. I arrived at her house just after 8 in the morning. We had planned to spend a couple of hours loading gifts into our cars before heading to the venue. Something immediately felt wrong. Her car was still sitting in the driveway exactly where it had been the night before. The front door wasn't locked. At first, I assumed she was in the backyard or taking a quick walk around the neighborhood. Emma often enjoyed quiet morning walks during her pregnancy because they helped with her back pain. I stepped inside and called her name. There was no answer. The house was strangely quiet. Her purse sat neatly on the kitchen counter. Her phone rested beside it, still plugged into the charger. A cup of tea had gone completely cold next to the sink, as though someone had abandoned it halfway through breakfast. Nothing looked disturbed. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken furniture. No overturned chairs, no shattered glass. It looked as though Emma had simply stood up and walked away. Except she hadn't taken anything with her. She wouldn't have left without her phone. She especially wouldn't have left without telling me. We had spoken less than 10 hours earlier, laughing over text messages about the ridiculous baby shower games our cousins had planned. At first, I tried not to panic. I checked every room in the house. The nursery was exactly the way she had proudly shown it to me just 2 days earlier. Tiny dresses hung neatly inside the closet. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. A white crib sat beneath the window, waiting for a baby who would arrive in just a few weeks. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. I called her phone anyway, even though it was sitting only a few feet away. The ringtone echoed through the empty house. I called my mother. She hadn't heard from Emma either. Within 30 minutes, our entire family was searching nearby streets, parks, coffee shops, and grocery stores. Every place Emma normally visited came back with the same answer. No one had seen her. By late morning, panic had replaced confusion. We contacted the police. An officer arrived surprisingly quickly after hearing that Emma was 34 weeks pregnant. He asked dozens of questions while another officer photographed the house. Had Emma seemed upset recently? Did she have medical problems? Could she have gone somewhere voluntarily? Did anyone want to hurt her? Every question made the situation feel more frightening. Because I honestly didn't know the answers. Emma had always seemed happy. Or at least I thought she had. While the officers searched the house, I stayed in her home hoping to remember something. Anything. That might explain where she had gone. That was when I noticed her laptop sitting open on the dining room table. The screen had gone dark from inactivity. I hesitated before touching it. It felt invasive. Emma valued her privacy, and I hated the idea of reading through her personal life. But she was missing. Nothing mattered more than finding her. I opened the laptop. It didn't require a password because she had apparently stepped away only minutes after using it. At first, everything looked ordinary. There were shopping tabs for baby clothes, a checklist for the shower, and a playlist she planned to use during the party. Then I clicked on her browser history. One search after another appeared on the screen. The first few didn't seem unusual, but the deeper I looked, the colder I felt. The searches weren't about diapers or cribs anymore. They were about escaping. How to leave a controlling husband while pregnant. Can someone track my phone without my permission? Women's shelters that accept pregnant mothers. Signs of emotional abuse during pregnancy. My hands started shaking. I suddenly realized that my sister hadn't disappeared. She had been planning to run. And somehow, none of us had noticed. Emma had hidden it from everyone. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. We had simply explained them away, because it was easier than imagining something was seriously wrong. She had slowly stopped attending family dinners. She rarely answered phone calls unless her husband, Mark, was at work. Whenever we invited her somewhere, she almost always said Mark had already made other plans. At the time, none of it seemed alarming. Couples spend more time together after marriage. Pregnancy can be exhausting. We told ourselves there had to be a reasonable explanation. Now those memories looked completely different. I continued scrolling through her search history. The entries became more desperate with every page. She had searched for information about emergency restraining orders. She had looked up whether a husband could legally stop his wife from leaving while she was pregnant. She had even searched how to safely disappear without being tracked by a family member. None of this sounded like someone planning a surprise. It sounded like someone planning an escape. I opened her email account next. Most of the messages were ordinary. Baby registry updates, appointment reminders, promotional emails from children's clothing stores. Then I noticed a folder that had been archived instead of deleted. Inside were dozens of emails exchanged with a woman named Sarah. I recognized the name immediately. Sarah had been Emma's best friend in college, but they had supposedly drifted apart years ago. At least, that was what Emma had always told us. The emails told a very different story. Sarah had never disappeared from Emma's life. They had simply stopped communicating openly. Most of their conversations were careful and coded. Instead of directly mentioning problems at home, Emma referred to needing fresh air or finding a safer place to breathe. Sarah always seemed to understand exactly what she meant. One message caught my attention. It had been sent only 2 nights earlier. Emma wrote that she didn't think she could pretend everything was fine much longer. She said she was terrified of bringing a baby into the environment she was living in. She admitted she had waited too long because she believed things would eventually improve. Sarah's reply was short. She told Emma that the plan was still ready whenever she decided she couldn't stay another day. There was no explanation of what the plan meant. Only one sentence stood out. When you're ready, leave everything that can be tracked behind. I stared at those words for a long time. Her phone, her wallet, even her car. Everything had been left exactly where it could be found. Suddenly, her disappearance made perfect sense. She hadn't forgotten those things. She had abandoned them on purpose. The police were still searching the house when I quietly walked outside and called the detective handling the case. I explained everything I had found. Instead of sounding surprised, he became noticeably more serious. He asked me not to tell anyone else until they could verify the information. He also asked one question that immediately unsettled me. Has her husband arrived yet? I looked across the street. As if on cue, Mark's truck pulled into the driveway. He jumped out before the engine had even stopped. From a distance, he looked exactly like a devastated husband. He rushed toward the officers, demanding to know whether they had found his wife. He hugged my mother while she cried. He wrapped his arms around my father. He looked every bit like a man whose pregnant wife had mysteriously vanished. If I hadn't seen those searches myself, I probably would have believed every second of his performance. The detective spoke with him privately for nearly 20 minutes. Mark answered every question calmly. He claimed they had gone to bed around 11 the previous night. According to him, everything had been perfectly normal. They had watched television, talked about the baby shower, and gone to sleep. When he woke up early for work, Emma was supposedly still asleep beside him. He insisted he had no idea how she could have disappeared. It sounded convincing. Almost too convincing. While everyone else focused on comforting one another, I couldn't stop watching him. Something about his behavior felt rehearsed. He cried at the right moments. He hugged the right people. He asked all the questions a worried husband should ask. Yet I never saw genuine panic in his eyes. Instead, I noticed something else. Every few minutes, he checked his phone. Not casually. Obsessively. Sometimes only 30 seconds apart. He wasn't waiting for updates from the police. It looked more like he was waiting for something, or someone, to appear on a map. That thought sent a chill through me. I remembered one of Emma's searches. Can someone track my phone without my permission? If Mark had been monitoring her location, leaving her phone behind would have made him believe she had never left the house. Maybe that had been her entire plan. Maybe she wanted him searching in the wrong place while she disappeared somewhere he could never find her. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to believe something I hadn't even considered before. Maybe my sister wasn't missing. Maybe she had escaped. And if that was true, the most dangerous part of her plan had only just begun. The detective asked me to forward every email and screenshot I had found. Within an hour, 2 investigators were carefully reviewing Emma's laptop, while another officer requested a warrant for additional digital records. They weren't treating the case as a simple missing person investigation anymore. They were trying to determine whether Emma had disappeared willingly or whether someone had forced her to leave. Mark remained at the house the entire time. He continued answering questions with remarkable composure. He thanked the officers repeatedly for their hard work, offered everyone bottled water, and even apologized for taking up their time. Anyone meeting him for the first time would have described him as calm, cooperative, and deeply concerned. But the more I watched him, the less genuine he seemed. His emotions appeared almost perfectly timed. Whenever another family member started crying, he immediately looked heartbroken. Whenever an officer approached him, he straightened his posture and answered with carefully chosen words. It felt less like grief and more like a performance. That afternoon, the detective quietly pulled me aside. He asked if there was anyone outside the family Emma might trust enough to contact during an emergency. Only one name came to mind. Sarah. I called her immediately. The phone rang several times before she answered. The moment she heard my voice, she sounded nervous. I explained that Emma had disappeared and that the police were involved. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Sarah insisted she hadn't spoken to Emma in weeks. The answer came too quickly. Almost as though she had rehearsed it. I mentioned the emails I had found. Another silence followed. This one lasted much longer. When Sarah finally spoke again, her voice had completely changed. She sounded exhausted, scared, almost guilty. She admitted that Emma had contacted her several months earlier, after years of barely speaking. At first, the conversations had been harmless. Emma simply wanted someone outside the family to talk to. Gradually, the truth began to surface. Mark had never hit her. He had never left bruises that anyone could photograph. Instead, he controlled every part of her life so slowly that even Emma hadn't realized how much freedom she had lost. He insisted on knowing where she went. He questioned every purchase she made. He monitored her bank account. He criticized her friends until she stopped seeing them. Then he convinced her that distancing herself from her family would reduce unnecessary stress during the pregnancy. Little by little, her world became smaller. And Mark became the center of it. By the time Emma understood what was happening, she no longer believed anyone would believe her. There were no broken bones, no visible injuries. Only constant fear. Sarah confessed that she had begged Emma to leave months earlier. Emma always refused. She believed things would improve after the baby arrived. Instead, they became worse. Mark reportedly began talking about the baby as though she belonged only to him. He made comments about homeschooling, moving away from both families, and limiting who would be allowed to visit after the birth. Emma became terrified that once the baby was born, escaping would be nearly impossible. That fear finally pushed her to make a decision. Sarah admitted there had been a plan. She refused to reveal where Emma had gone, but she confirmed one important detail. Emma had left voluntarily. She had disappeared before sunrise with help from someone Mark had never met. She intentionally left behind every electronic device he could track. Her phone, her smartwatch, even the family car. Everything had been chosen to make it appear as though she had never left the house. Sarah ended the call by asking me to trust Emma. She promised my sister was alive. She also warned me not to tell anyone what she had confessed, not even our parents. The fewer people who knew Emma's location, the safer she would remain. When I shared the conversation with the detective, he didn't seem surprised. In fact, he admitted that situations involving coercive control often looked exactly like this. Victims disappeared without warning because leaving openly was simply too dangerous. If the controlling partner discovered the plan beforehand, the risk of violence increased dramatically. The detective assured me they would verify Sarah's story through official channels. If Emma had reached a protected shelter, they would eventually receive confirmation that she was safe, even if her exact location remained confidential. For the first time since that terrible morning, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. Emma might not be lost. She might finally be free. But while I was beginning to believe she had escaped, Mark was becoming increasingly desperate. And desperation can make a dangerous person even more unpredictable. By the following morning, the investigation had quietly shifted. The police were no longer searching every park and roadside as though Emma had simply wandered away. Instead, they were working behind the scenes to confirm whether she had entered a protected shelter under confidentiality laws. They couldn't tell us everything, but the detective finally shared one piece of information that changed everything. Emma was alive, she was safe, and she did not want her location disclosed. The relief that swept through our family was overwhelming. My mother broke down in tears, while my father simply sat in silence with his head in his hands. For nearly 24 hours, we had feared the worst. Knowing she was alive was enough. A week later, I was finally allowed to see her. The shelter was in another city, and its address wasn't listed publicly. A staff member met me outside and escorted me inside after confirming my identity. When I saw Emma, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked exhausted. Months of stress had left dark circles beneath her eyes, and she had lost far more weight than anyone should during a pregnancy. But despite everything, there was something different about her. For the first time in years, she didn't look afraid. She explained everything. Mark had never needed to raise his hand to control her. He isolated her from friends until she believed she had no one left. He convinced her that every disagreement was her fault. He monitored her spending, criticized every decision she made, and gradually made her feel incapable of living without him. When she became pregnant, his behavior intensified. He talked about the baby as though Emma were simply carrying a child that belonged to him. He discussed moving far away after the birth, limiting family visits, and making every major decision himself. Emma realized that once the baby arrived, leaving would become far more complicated. She quietly began planning her escape. For months, she saved small amounts of cash whenever she could. She memorized important phone numbers instead of storing them on her phone. She contacted Sarah through an old email account Mark didn't know existed. Together, they planned every detail. She chose the morning of the baby shower because everyone expected her schedule to be unusual. Family members would assume she was busy preparing for the celebration, giving her several precious hours before anyone realized she was gone. Leaving behind her phone, wallet, and car wasn't a mistake. It was the only way to disappear without being tracked. 3 months later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Mark immediately filed for custody and tried to convince the court that Emma had suffered a mental breakdown during pregnancy. But his own actions told a different story. The police had recovered months of text messages, financial records, location history, and emails documenting his pattern of coercive control. Investigators also discovered hidden tracking devices connected to his account, along with records showing he had repeatedly monitored Emma's movements without her knowledge. The evidence painted a picture far different from the caring husband he had pretended to be. The court granted Emma primary custody and issued long-term protective orders. The divorce was finalized the following year. Today, my niece is 4 years old. She's loud, curious, fearless, and surrounded by people who love her. Emma eventually returned to school, rebuilt her career, and slowly found pieces of herself that she thought were gone forever. Sometimes we still talk about that morning, not because we want to remember the fear, but because we never want to forget how easy it is to mistake control for love when it happens little by little. Looking back, I realize my sister didn't vanish that morning. She escaped. The baby shower never happened. The cake was never cut. The decorations were packed away in boxes and forgotten. At the time, it felt like the happiest day of our family's life had been stolen from us. Now I understand that something far more important happened instead. That morning wasn't the day we lost Emma. It was the day she finally found her freedom. And every year, on the date that should have been her baby shower, our family celebrates something completely different. Not a party, not gifts. Just the quiet reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is leave before it's too late.